Ladies and gentlemen, welcome into another edition of Deportes Nation Soccer Podcast. This, the third edition. We still don't have a formal name, just so you know. Maybe you can help us in that naming process. I'm Alex Parra, always an honor and a pleasure. Thank you for being with us. You're not here to necessarily hear me or look at me, but you're here to talk with the man who you see on screen now. I welcome in the co-host of this show, Mr. Victor Araiza. Victor, first of all, good day. How are you, sir?
Thank you, Alex. Always a pleasure to be on here talking soccer with you. I don't know if they're here necessarily for me, but I think we can certainly get some discussion going here about the sport, certainly in our city, around our country, and yeah, get some good discussion points as well.
Absolutely. Victor, it's always great to be with you. I really appreciate your knowledge, your insight, your youth, by the way. And today I've got my realtor jacket on, just so you know, Victor. So if you're thinking about a duplex in a nice part of town, I'm the one you need to talk to. So there you go. And those of you that are listening to this have no idea what's happening because we have two versions, but we will get on with the show. Victor, why don't we start with one of the words you just used, country. The U.S. men's national team here in the international break. Last playing, of course, when we record this, they've just played in St. Louis against Uzbekistan, if I'm not mistaken. 3-0 win. Less to me about what happened on the field. A couple of things. I saw a stadium not completely full, which kind of troubled me. There's a lot of reasons I saw, Victor, of why that happened. And let's talk about that. But the return of Greg Berhalter, for many, he was done. It was part of the past. He's returned. This is his first game back, his second stint as manager of the U.S. men's national team.
Yeah, two good talking points, and maybe one related to the other. I know there was reports right from inside the stadium. Fans in St. Louis not very welcoming of Berhalter. I don't know if that necessarily played into it. I mean, I know people want to kind of jump on, St. Louis, soccer capital, right? The drum up to this whole game. And then just to kind of come out with a flat attendance in this case, right? Like a half-empty stadium. It is, from what we've seen over the years, right? And also heard, one of the intelligent soccer markets in the country. Maybe a mix of different factors, but obviously, maybe that could be one of them. But why not? I mean, this is a team that sells out for their MLS club. Maybe that's part of it. Maybe the pricing, that's been one of the things that have been a controversy too with U.S. soccer. A lot. Going with Berhalter, I just want to kind of add real quick. Obviously, everybody has a different opinion on the matter. I just think, he's in the position now. We'll see how he does. And certainly, I think the next big test will be Copa America next year. This wasn't really a huge test, and obviously, because of the World Cup being here in 2026, there's no World Cup qualifying. And even then, I mean, CONCACAF gets, people talk about the competition, the level. But again, I don't know how much we can take away from some of these results. It was a good win, feel good all around. But is it preparing the team for next year, right? I think that maybe that's what everybody kind of wants to get to.
Well, I think you're right. The friendlies, quote unquote, are one thing. The preparation, for me, the Greg Berhalter situation, to be honest with you, Victor, has been a distraction that doesn't make U.S. soccer, the federation, any better. And let me put it that way. It's nothing against the ability or the lack of ability that Greg Berhalter may have as a manager, as the coach of the team. I think it speaks of the disarray that we have at the U.S. Soccer Federation. And look, I'm going to be very blunt. These days, decisions are no longer made, Victor, based on results, based on winning or losing. There's so much more there. And I'm going to use the word drama. It's you've got to be careful about not offending these people or these people. You've got to be careful about the written language of the contract. If I dismiss someone, do I have costs to do it? Do I have to first think about, so it's gotten complicated, I'm going to use that word, but then what happens from my perspective is there's so many other issues involved, and we're seeing that with Spain, that it's no longer about the winning or losing. It doesn't justify someone's actions that cross the line. It doesn't justify someone not being ethical and correct and inclusive, but the world has changed. Remember, in other federations, there's no public conversation about this. You win, you stay. You lose, you're out. So now with so many other things that have gone on with Berhalter and the U.S. Soccer Federation, my question to you and to you, ladies and gentlemen, friends that are watching us, what direction does this team go in? Because all these things, Victor, to me, affect the product on the field.
No, agree. And certainly, the U.S. is no different than a lot of federations, soccer federations around the world. There's the drama and the politics that come with it. Certainly, that's been part of the case here with Berhalter. That's been the looming cloud, right? The shadow over the team. Does he have qualifications? Yes. And I think, could the U.S. have a better coach? I think that's also for discussion. That's, that's a big part of, right, the results, what maybe people were hoping this team could be in Qatar with such a young squad, and maybe where they ended up. Again, the goal for 2026, this may be the best chance for the United States to win a World Cup. Why not, right? With
Sure.
This generation playing at home, and is the U.S. national team, the men's national team, in the trajectory to get there? And I think, like you mentioned, it is a lot of drama. A lot of it, too, I think it is warranted. Berhalter doesn't have maybe as much success in his managerial career, right? Could you say there's other, Americans in MLS that are better coaches, more accomplished? Maybe Brian Schmetzer, Peter Vermees. I think those options are there. Obviously, when Tata Martino was coaching in MLS, and that was an option that didn't even get explored, right? All these kind of moves. Jay Berhalter, the brother of the coach, right, being involved as an executive with U.S. Soccer, now one of the top level men also in Major League Soccer. Cindy Parlow-Cohn, the president of U.S. Soccer, going to the same college as Greg Berhalter. I mean, these are things that, the Claudio Reyna drama with Greg Berhalter, ex-teammates, and obviously Gio Reyna. And that, obviously is the big issue here. All these things are just kind of there. And you're right. I don't think anybody really got a resolution. I think that's kind of what you're getting at in this offseason and this break from Berhalter. And Berhalter's back now. We'll see where it goes with Gio Reyna, and if this can all kind of, be everybody gets on the same page. But it's certainly an issue that keeps lingering. When you're right, it should be preparing to challenge for a World Cup.
Victor, you mentioned the thus far lack of. What's the word I'm looking for? I'm going to use the word consistency from the U.S. Soccer Federation. Here's where I'm going with this. We saw what happened with the women's national team down under, not being able to win another World Cup. The men's team has clearly never won a men's World Cup. At what point is there pressure to deliver? And is leadership conscious of this? What is the priority for our soccer federation? And here's where I'm going to throw something out to you. The U.S. Soccer Federation is not only about the national teams, Victor, and winning World Cups and winning competitions. We that are involved even at the youth level, at the amateur level, are ruled, quote unquote, by U.S. Soccer. They're the ones that set out our rules. My point is, right. I believe that the focus has been on winning a World Cup, on marketing, on dollars, on the business side. I don't think the federation has been focused enough on other things, which is growing the sport in the country. Yes, they do that through the leagues, etc. Are we headed in the right direction, Victor? If results are a way to measure success, they just haven't been there. The U.S. the women's national team, we saw what happened. The men now with the World Cup coming to the United States, Canada, and Mexico, great opportunity. But is the timing right? Do we realistically have the best leadership leading U.S. soccer?
Well, I think that's part of the debate, right? And I think, maybe a lot of the younger crowd, I'll put it that way, right, on Twitter, the way the criticism is around U.S. games, I do call that somewhat growth. I mean, I know maybe it's, it's maybe more too far to one side or the other than some people would like, but there's conversation about the game now more than there has been, I think, around the U.S. men's national team, because I think everybody sees the potential and has the want to see this U.S. team get to its highest peak, especially, again, hosting a World Cup here in just a matter of a few years, hosting the Copa America next year as well, having, the best generational pool, right, that they've had of players, especially at big clubs. Pulisic is playing at Milan. Obviously, they have some players in the last year in the Premier League that have sort of switched around, but they're still at elite levels, right? I mean, PSV, even the couple guys that are there. I mean, that's still a team competing in in the top half of their domestic league, challenging for a championship, getting a chance to play in European football. So I mean, all these things are just, the time is now, right? I think that's the feeling, and and you're right. Is the leadership there? That's the kind of stuff that sort of seems business as usual, as it's always been. And that's where, I don't think, again, people care, right? Maybe some do, right, for what it means locally. But I think ultimately, if we had the best people, we had the best intentions of mind, if it didn't seem like we're just standing still, I think that's what gets people frustrated, right? Hopefully we see it, and again, hopefully the clock is there, the pressure is there for Berhalter, that if he doesn't perform, there's still time to make a change ahead of the next World Cup. I'm not saying, he should be on the hot seat, but I do think that should be, I hope, the goal in mind, right? The time is now. I mean, if it's not World Cup now, I don't know when.
What a better opportunity. The only previous time, of course, 1994, when the World Cup came to the United States. I think
right.
The country...
And it was a different U.S. then.
A different U.S., a different time in many ways, and not a realistic conversation, this is my opinion, to say, can the U.S. win one? I think, Victor, that we are now in the position to say, you know what, if a lot of things can come together, and I'll say this, and people can disagree with me, but the United States right now is the best team in CONCACAF, in my opinion.
Yeah.
And Mexico can cry about that, and Mexican fans can say, oh no, but that's just the truth, as far as I can tell, as far as I can see, right, based on results in important competitions. So that's something that's going to, I think, drive the narrative here as we get closer to 2026. So we mentioned the U.S. men's national team picking up a 3-0 victory over Uzbekistan. They'll be taking on Oman in St. Paul. We mentioned the first game versus Uzbekistan in St. Louis. But again, these are friendlies at this point. Let's see if the more fans turn out in St. Paul on the 12th.
Yeah, another good soccer market, another good MLS team that regularly has good crowds at the Allianz Field. So yeah, we'll see if it's more of the same. Obviously, World Cup qualifying match and a friendly of this category are different levels. But yeah, let's see the support, and I hope there's more conversation, because I don't think enough has been made about this lack of support, especially when Mexico continues to get about 50,000 for a meaningless friendly as well
in the United States.
Yeah.
Just to be clear,
in the United States.
We'll talk about El Tri and what they did up in Arlington in their first match here of friendlies. I wanted to kind of continue the conversation, Victor, of U.S. men's national team and Greg Berhalter coming back. We have news also in the last couple of days that a former U.S. men's national team coach, twice, if I'm not mistaken, Bruce Arena, has resigned now officially from the New England Revolution of MLS. This is after he was suspended several weeks back regarding or due to an ongoing investigation about potential comments he's made internally. So it was troublesome to hear that he was under investigation and was suspended. I don't pretend to know the details of what that is doing, but is this the end of Bruce Arena's career? Will we ever see him manage again, Victor? He's made history with the national team. He's been a coach that has done it at the university level, the professional level, and the national team level. It would be sad if this was his last chapter.
Yeah, like you mentioned, I mean, a lot of details still hidden, right? And nobody knows what exactly went on. Obviously, it seems to be a grave matter if he's sort of, in a way, banned from coaching in MLS, unless there's reopening of the investigation. I know those deals came out in the reports from The Athletic. That Commissioner Don Garber met with Bruce Arena. Arena also met with the owners of Revolution, the Crafts, and that this sort of seems to be a graceful way to help Bruce out without a lot of this stuff maybe coming to light. But what could it be, right? That's the big question everybody's asking. And like you mentioned, is this the end of his career? Obviously, because of his age, I would think that's part of it. I don't know if he's open to coaching in USL, and if that's I don't think the MLS thing would be an impediment to that. But certainly, a lot of people still have questions about what's going on.
Victor, the word investigation is now part of our lexicon when it comes to American soccer. Whether it's the NWSL, whether it's the MLS, whether it's the men's national team, whether it's the women's national team. Where are we culturally? And I'm referring to our soccer culture, Victor. If things don't go quite right for someone, and I get it, we have to behave. We have to follow, I think, a professional level of act and change, but we hear about investigations everywhere. Is this the new normal?
Maybe. It doesn't to be a trend, right? And I think certainly but I think, at least in society, right? We've seen it's been big events, right? That spur a lot of conversation. And certainly also, it's happened in sports, different movements. I think it's, I know we're in sort of a litigious society in the United States anyways, right? Where, you almost see lawsuits for any given reason. But I think in sports, I welcome it to a certain point, right? I mean, I think when some of these investigations get overly long and there's really no transparency, right, into what's going on, I think maybe that's where the general public would like to see some more details. Obviously, there's things that aren't going to be disclosed, but an effort, right, to inform, update in a timely manner. And I think when you don't see any of that, and you see a lack of reporting as well, right? I mean, I think that's kind of what worries people. Why the holdup? What's taking so long? Right. What could it be? And I think that's maybe the bigger issue. Maybe it's a lack of soccer media, right? When The Athletic is really the only big outlet that cares enough to do some digging, to investigate, which is, a task in itself, right? Not every media outlet is, can publish an article, but the outlets, and especially, with traditional journalism changing, investigative reporting has been going away for a couple of years now. And I think that's part of, this conversation. And the other side of it is the lack of maybe transparency from the league, from the team. All that comes into play. But in general, I think I will reiterate, I think it's a good thing to have, because I think there's been moments in the past when, things just kind of get swept under the rug for the same reason.
And look, transparency is always good. I have no doubt about that. It's maybe, like you said, the approach to that transparency, how much can or can't be disclosed. And also, Victor, I have to be honest with you, different people have different perspectives and opinions on what all this should or shouldn't be. And generationally, like I mentioned, I've seen a change from the way things were to the way things are today. And there's a lot of different opinions. So we'll see how all of this affects our current soccer culture. Yeah. And Victor, so transitioning from what happened with the U.S. men's national team, talking a bit about Greg Berhalter and Bruce Arena, and maybe him not ever returning to coaching. We'll see. He's 71 years old, and is there still some time there? Well, if you gauge it by our politicians, he's still got a good 10 or 15 years, because the top presidential candidates are pushing 80. That's the whole conversation, Victor, for another day. But let's transition over to another national team. We talked about El Tri, the Mexican national team. Great attendance at Arlington. They are consistently playing at home here in the United States. They have that support. 2-2 tie with Australia. And Hector Herrera called up once again, player with Houston Dynamo FC at the club level. I watched some highlights of the match. I'll be honest with you, I didn't watch it all. Again, it's a team that was down 0-2, if I'm not mistaken, in the game. They came back to tie it. Less about on the field, Victor. How do you see this Mexican national team as they're also starting to gear up for 2026? And do you think Hector Herrera will be part of that team in 26?
Well, it's not out of the question. I think certainly the legends in Mexico, or the longtime players, I should say, have sort of had a chance. Mexico hasn't necessarily been a national team that moves on players maybe as fast as they should. I know that that's part of the conversation, right, with Hector Herrera. We'll see. It was Jaime Lozano's first official match as the head coach without the interim tag. Now he took over in the Gold Cup, did a fine job, was given the continuity, and now we'll see. Right, already maybe encountering some struggles, but it was his decision, right, to bring in Herrera into the fold, despite maybe a lot of fans and certainly a lot of Mexican media outlets. Saying that the prior, right, that his time has passed, that it's time to move on. It was reported on the TUDN broadcast that, coincidentally, when Mexico was here in Houston, Herrera, which we know went over to the Mexican national team's hotel, right, and it was then that he spoke to the head coach, that he made it clear his intentions to return to the national team. So you can see some conversation there, right? Lozano, and maybe Coca before him didn't get a chance at this, but similar statements, right, where it's like the doors are open for everybody, but with Lozano you're starting to see at least that maybe that's sort of true.
Right.
As far as the game, it was very difficult. Again, a lot of criticism with these games are, what does it benefit Mexico, right, to advance, to get better as a team, to work on things that the coach wants to instill. This was essentially a marketing game, right? A cash cow.
Aren't they all for the Mexican national team?
They are, and a good example of this is, they can never get the grass right in Arlington, in that stadium, right? And it's the same conversation I think here in Houston when they come to play here. So this time they had artificial turf, and it was supposed to be the best of the best, but it still had some wavy pattern. It's still whatever. But because of that, right, you have big, long bounces of the ball. Not the style that maybe Lozano wanted to play, very chaotic. Australia managed to adjust quickly and take the lead because of that. And Hector Herrera was one of the players that didn't look well, right? That didn't look his best. So again, this leaves for a lot of conversation. Many different talking points, but overall they rescued a result 2-2, and they had one of their younger players, right, score in the end. But again, comparing it again to the United States just seems like, and granted, Mexico's going to face Uzbekistan too, but in that sense, just seems like they're a little more definitive in where they're heading. This thing, like you said, playing in the United States, aren't they all? If that could ever change, maybe they could advance a little more. But within those constraints, I think they try to accomplish something, and they looked okay.
Again, I think the actual result is a piece of now what all this is, the timing of games, the location, the marketing of those games, the television rights. It's a machine, Victor, that rolls along, whether we like it or not, whether we or anyone is lamenting that the Mexican national team in the United States has more fans, and I'm going to put it that way. That's just the truth. Driven by the marketing, driven by the sponsors, driven by the federations, driven by those interests. I'm not criticizing that as a negative. I think you've got to give it the overall context. I go back to what you and I have talked about. There are certain MLS teams that don't have to win for them to be successful. I think the Mexican national team in the United States just has to show up. And people will be there, whether it's to cheer them on because they did great or to criticize them because they did bad. Yeah. Hey, as long as you're talking about me, any press is good press. Is that maybe the outlook here?
I think in Mexico, well, at least around the Mexican national team, maybe as it is with a lot of the Latin American teams. I don't know. Maybe in the U.S. We have some of this. I think you'd like more talk going deeper into the sport, right? Maybe just the controversy, or maybe just criticizing the coach for the sake of criticizing, right? But I think there are things you can dive into, right? The sporting side of things. This conversation, obviously, ongoing with Herrera. Should he be part of this national team? Has his time passed? I think there's arguments for both sides, sure. Right? I think there's certainly things he can contribute, his wisdom. I don't know if he certainly has it to be a starter. Not the way he looked against Australia, right? But maybe he can still work on his form. In Houston, we'll see, right? I mean, I think these are all be questions we get answers to in due time, but certainly, plenty to talk about with the Mexican national team. And I think, again, another team that's looking to next year for the Copa America. And again, why not Mexico as a contender for the 2026 World Cup to have some games at home? Obviously, their home team in the United States. So that's also a team that should be aspiring to win the World Cup now, because if not now, then when?
Along with Victor Araiza, I'm Alex Parra. Thanks to all you that are joining us on this soccer podcast. Number 3, it's our third version, our third edition of it. We're still looking for a name.
Yeah.
We're appreciative of all of you that are listening, that are tuning in. And by the way, we've had very positive feedback, or at least positive feedback of Victor's comments. They say, old man, you just got to take it easy. So we are grateful, though, Victor, of all the people that are following us. And you know what? Someone asked, it's in English, ? Well, in our best version of English, right, Victor?
Yeah. Obviously, the Deportes Nation brings bilingual content. I think that gives us the opportunity to do both languages. And why not expand the conversation? Because I think there are a lot of times when you get Spanish coverage and fans are, I wish I spoke Spanish so I can understand what they're saying, or I could read this coverage from a Latin country or surrounding a Latin team, right? And vice versa. I think there's a lot of coverage in English that's worth reading, worth listening. That maybe we're trying to help people here across the cultural barrier.
Absolutely, and we're this is the world we live in, Victor. You and I have talked about this. Our world is bilingual. Our world is bicultural. Our world is, especially in the city of Houston, every day talking and meeting with people from different parts of the world with different perspectives, and I think it makes us better. So I'm sure someone can have a different opinion about that piece. You mentioned Hector Herrera, what he did with the Mexican national team, Victor, and now let's talk about his return to the Dynamo, which will be later on this week as the Dynamo get back into action. Although there was some MLS action, if I'm not mistaken, during the break. Do I have that right?
Yeah. A couple of teams had some games. St. Louis, who Houston will face in this next game, they went out and played against the Galaxy, the current leaders in the Western Conference, despite being an expansion team this year. They were winning. The Galaxy came back and tied it, partly due to an ejection for St. Louis. But certainly it seems like this race in the Western Conference is as tight as it's been I think in years. I know every year we say the same thing, but certainly now with 9 teams getting into the playoffs, it just seems like it's going to be a race to the finish.
And Victor, how do you see the Dynamo in what's left of the season? It's a team, and we'll talk a little bit about the Houston Dynamo off the field relative to their academy and youth soccer here in a few minutes. But if your objective so far, what Ben Olsen has done, what Pat Onstad has done, is improvement from the time they've come in to where we are today. Pat Onstad said this week, hey, it's on the radar to make it to the playoffs. I think it's for them to lose at this point, and let's say they get to the playoffs, and that's it. That's already an accomplishment. Let's also dream. What if in the U.S. Open Cup final versus Miami and Messi, they're able to pick up that trophy once again? And that would be the second time in their history, if I'm not mistaken. So dream big at this point, that there's on the field a lot more positive relative to a year ago, relative to 5 years ago?
No, absolutely. Why not, right? Again, the time is now to go for it. Certainly in the final, why shouldn't we think they could try to win it? But it is going to be a very compact schedule to end the season here for them. Again, it looks like I think when we kind of just stare at the race, see how many games are left at home, it certainly looks like they're in, right?
Yeah.
I'm not going to sing any tunes yet because I think it could still, depending on what happens in these next couple of games, they have some opponents in the Western Conference that could derail them a little bit, and Herrera and Carrasquilla are a big part of that. They're both on international duty, as we mentioned. Herrera with Mexico playing here in the United States, but still two games. Carrasquilla traveling in Central America. So the form of those two players is really going to determine if this team gets into the playoffs, I think.
Victor, you know this because often MLS teams have to choose. Do I use my best team for U.S. Open Cup competition? Do I focus on MLS matches? I think that's an interesting choice that's coming for Ben Olsen potentially, depending on the calendar. Do I prepare for that final versus Miami, and is that my focus? Or do I prepare to continue trying to get into the playoffs? It doesn't necessarily have to be a choice, one or another. But when you talk about the calendar, when you talk about training and focusing, it may come to that. And which one do you want more? Which one do you focus on more? Knowing you've got physical limitations, players get tired. It's a choice. I think that both teams have to make.
Yeah, and being in the final is nice, but that's an extra game, as you mentioned, into this whole thing, right before the rivalry game against FC Dallas. But, that's why if they can get some points here at the beginning of the stretch against St. Louis at home, against one meeting, right? Maybe two if you go, if you want to be generous to the beginning of that decade. So they have to absolutely make the playoffs. But once you're in that game in the final, obviously you want to go for it with, because again, when will you have a chance to maybe win another trophy? I mean, these opportunities come few and far between sometimes, right? So it is something to juggle, but I think where they're at now, they should be able to go for both.
Now, a couple of things. I think short term, the match against St. Louis, who are leading the Western Conference, 48 points, is a test right away. I think even though it's at home, so in Shell, in the ongoing heat of Houston, it can be an advantage for Ben Olsen's team. But I think right there now, well, you can start seeing some patterns if this team, meaning the Houston Dynamo FC, have what it takes to be competitive once they would get into the playoffs. Is that fair?
It's a good test. Certainly the first meeting they had with St. Louis down here. The one they had over there wasn't very good, right? They got played out of the park.
Sure.
And certainly could have been a much bigger loss. So this will be a good team. It helps Houston again that St. Louis just played last week. They will have a player out because of the red card. Coincidentally, a Houstonian, which when we talk about talent from Houston and why it's not making its way to the Dynamo, maybe that's a name to add to the list. But St. Louis is a team that not your typical expansion team, does things right. Just I call it just kind of common sense soccer, right? They just went out, got good players. They got a general manager or sporting director, whatever the title is, of a guy who just knows the game and knows what he's building there in St. Louis. So I think it'll be a really good test. Win or lose, hopefully, right? It's not lost points at home, but I think even as I've been projecting some of these games, even if they lose this game, they should still be able to get into the playoffs.
We look at the calendar, September, October. The last match will be away at Providence Park against the Timbers. Yeah. So there's still some juggling here, but also there's some points to pick up, Victor, and I think that needs to be the focus. Look, a turnaround from what we've lived, and I can't believe we're talking, not only a year or two, but nearly a decade to think about being in the playoffs and being a contender. I'm going to use that word. Yeah. It's a turnaround.
And obviously, this season, because Messi is involved in the Open Cup final, perhaps winning that would resonate more than maybe other years, right? Winning the Open Cup. But certainly, I think to be relevant in this town, you got to make it to the playoffs. That's been the one thing, stopping him in years. Not the only thing.
Sure.
I want to make that clear.
Sure.
But
sure.
it's been one of the big, obviously, success indicators that they haven't had, that the general public here in Houston can sort of relate.
Yeah, look, Victor, I know you can help me out here, but as I look at the schedule, it's St. Louis, which is a challenge. We'll see how they measure up. Then you have Vancouver, Kansas City. Then you sandwich in there within the same week the final against Miami. And then you wrap up the month against Dallas. You mentioned that rivalry. I mean, I think everything's going to be decided here, literally in the last week of September, meaning are we picking up points? Is the team picking up points? Did they do well in the U.S. Open Cup final? So this is such a pivotal month for Houston Dynamo FC, at least on the field.
And between their last two games, between the Dallas game and Portland, they'll have the October FIFA break. So that's something that kind of comes into play. But Portland, who fired their coach, now they seem to be back in the race. Right. So, I mean, that's why it's complicated to say, I couldn't sit here, be objective and tell you they're going to make the playoffs, right? Flat out, because I think there's a lot of factors here at play. I agree with you. I think they're in a good position, and we'll see if hopefully they can maintain that position.
We hope so. So that's what's going on with the Dynamo FC, the professional team on the field as they come back from an international break. But this week, Victor, I had the opportunity to talk to Pat Onstead, Asher Mendelson, to talk about what's going on off the field relative to their academy. The academy program, for those of you that may or may not know, is really the feeder of young players, young talent that have a pathway to be part of Dynamo 2, Dynamo Dos, as we call it, the second team, or the first team, which is the Houston Dynamo FC. In the past, Victor, the relationship with the youth community has been, look, we want players, we want the top talent to come and be part of the academy system. Unfortunately, that relationship, and I'll use this for full disclosure because I am part of the youth club culture community in Houston, it's been fractured mainly because for many years there was a relationship, I'm going to call this a marketing relationship between the professional team and the professional club and what was called Dynamo Dash Youth Club, which was a youth club affiliated in the sense of, I believe they worked marketing and sales of jerseys. But the way that was presented to the community, Victor, and this is my take on it, was that if you joined that club, you had the pathway to professionalism, be it on the women's side, on the Dash team, or on the men's side with the Dynamo. Nothing is further from the truth. And now many years later, after the relationship has disintegrated, has disappeared, under new ownership, there's been a reset and a change. And now the philosophy is, you know what? We want to work with everyone. We want the best talent and players available to be part of our academy. Many caveats. Number one, not everyone's going to make it. It really is the best of the very best. But how do we identify who those players are? How do we get them within our circle so we can identify them? But it's not only about what the Dynamo want, Victor. It's about what the community now is willing to do to partner with the Dynamo to even have those conversations. So that was a summary, and I know there may be a lot of questions. The bottom line right now is there's been a change in the way they approach the youth soccer community. I think personally, Victor, for the better. But where does it go now? And I'll finish with this, and I promise, sir, I'll let you have the floor. Right now, the word that is being used with the Dynamo FC professional team is, look, the youth community needs to build trust because for years the relationship has been destroyed. And you know specifically what that led to, Victor, that youth clubs that every weekend were playing against the Houston Dynamo or Houston Dash naturally saw them as the competition, as the enemy.
Right.
And then the professional team wanted those same youth players to buy tickets to support the team. It wasn't even logical. And what it led to specifically was what the youth clubs were not supporting in attending Dynamo and Dash professional matches. So a lot there, and I want you, friends, ladies and gentlemen, to reach out if you have questions, comments, or you disagree with the way at least I've presented this. But Victor, a lot to chew on. Pick any part of it, if you will.
No, yeah, there is a lot of layers to this. I don't know if we'll get to all of it, but like you said, instead of uniting the local clubs to the team, to the pro teams, it had the opposite effect. That actually alienated the community, right? And I think that's a big part of it. I would extend that it's not just the academy. I think it's the entire club. It's all the way up to the professional level that has to earn the trust back. And I hope that's the mentality inside those offices, because that's the truth. As you mentioned, I mean, most recently the Dynamo Dash Club, right, or Dynamo Dash Youth was, basically the team that just borrowed the name. And I don't think a lot of people knew that distinction, right? I certainly, until I read the release where they announced the Pardon of the Ways, if you will, that's when I sort of, it sort of clicked in my head. And it's like, oh, so they weren't even a feeder system. They were just, it's basically, hey, we can borrow your name and we're going to say we're Houston Dynamo FC or Houston Dash. And I think from what I've heard also, they've gone and they had bought other local clubs, right? Because that's where, one of the Dash players, I think it's Michaela Baum, right? Where she was marketed as the first Houston Dash product to make it to the pro team. And again, if you know the local scene, that couldn't be further from the truth. I mean, she was part of Houston Dash Youth for a year or something before she came up to the. So those kind of things are just the sort of lack of transparency, marketing ploys that just rub people the wrong way locally, right? And that's just one example. I go all the way back to the last two academy directors, where it's literally poaching of talent. Like you mentioned, there was at least a marketing partnership. With some clubs, with some leagues, there wasn't even a partnership. It was just, hey, they just came into your league and they talk to parents or talk to players and they try to, hey, come join the Houston Dynamo Academy. And that's a confrontation, right? That's not the way to ingrain yourself in the community. That was certainly the way, at least I've heard with James Clarkson when he was the academy director, with Paul Holliker when he was the academy director. And then you mentioned, I mean, it's kind of like there was a big ask, right, to attend the games, but what do these clubs get in return, right? I mean, if it was you scratch my back, I scratch yours. I mean, maybe you can make it work that type of way with the community, but I don't think people felt it was even that. So I think I heard, and I invite everybody to listen to that interview. It was 30 minutes with the general manager Pat Onstad and with the technical director Asher Mendelson. And certainly we're appreciative of their time. Just some of the things in that interview, right? The past is in the past. I sort of get that point where you want to turn the page, but I hope they're not ignoring the past, right? And I hope because of maybe a meeting or two that they've had, it doesn't stop there, right? Because it has to be continuous repair for Houston to make this what we've talked about it here in the last episode. I mean, I think there's a lot of work to be done. Maybe they're taking this thing in phases, but to me, the fact that it took 2 years into Onstad's tenure with the club, and it's basically the beginning, as they called it. They gotta speed it up.
Let me jump in there, Victor, because that's a really good point. If we're being objective, Asher Mendelson, Pat Onstad of the organization, getting in front of the community and saying, you know what, the past is in the past. We've got to move on. If you look at it and ask yourself, well, why did it take 2 years to reach this conclusion? Is it because it wasn't a priority? Is it because you didn't have sufficient information? Is it because you were legally bound to an arrangement that you couldn't change? You talk about transparency, or to be honest, Victor, the lack of transparency. Maybe their hands were tied, and whomever made that deal in the past, and we can speculate about who was in the Dynamo organization when the deal was cut. Obviously, it was leadership. Someone didn't invent this. It had to have been vetted. So there's responsibility there. But my point is, maybe there was an airtight agreement, and there's nothing anybody could do about it. So they accepted that and continued on. Clearly, though, it's a completely different direction now, Victor. And the question is, we can forget about the past, but we have to learn from it. And I think part of the difficulty today, Victor, from many people's perspective is, are we able to trust you? And then how are you going to work with everybody? To me, it's you went from an exclusive arrangement, Victor, of one entity that represented you, for better or worse. And business is business, and I get it. If they were happy with that business, that's them. But now you see the results. Swinging to the other extreme, if you will, is now I want to work with everybody. How is that even possible in a fractured market like Houston?
Yeah, trust is a big one. And, walking the walk is one thing, right? Or talking the talk, I should say, is one thing. And then walking it is different. And that's where they have to focus on. Again, I think, I'm with you. I understand there's certain things, pre-Onstad, pre-Mendelsohn, right? But I think you mentioned this in your interview, a lot of people in the community are not going to differentiate that. They don't know the before and after. So that's one of the things that they themselves have to get out in front of and inform, continue to harp on, right? The other one I'll mention is, I'll give you an example. Paul Holliker, whenever they decided to cut ties as the academy director, why wasn't it announced, Alex? Why wasn't there a press release? I mean, this is an organization that puts out a press release for basically everything.
It's Tuesday.
Why wasn't there
it's Tuesday. Here's a press release.
But why wasn't? I mean, that's one of those just one simple example of a lack of transparency under Mendelsohn and Onstad. That that's a big change to your academy. Why not announce it? Is it because we don't want to hurt people's feelings? Who is Tony Vigil, right? Why was he appointed? I'm not saying he's not qualified, but tell people the reasons why you're making moves instead of just kind of, and I think that's sort of where they show the community that they want them to be a part of the process, or whether it's just we're the Houston Dynamo and we're over here and we're minding our own business. And if we have something to tell you guys, we'll tell you. This interview was a good opportunity. They don't have to wait for any outlet in town to come to them, right? They don't have to wait for a TV station. They don't have to wait for a newspaper. There's a lot of things that they themselves can be proactive and get in front of. And again, hopefully it has changed, and hopefully they do regain the trust back, because that's the only way that this whole operation is going to work.
Here on Deportes Nation, our soccer podcast with Victor Araiza, I'm Alex Parra, talking a little bit of local soccer, Houston Dynamo FC, relative to their academy program and also to the youth community. And Victor, I want to leave for today that are business business only, Victor, and there's nothing wrong with that in our society. I welcome anyone that wants to take this on as a business. As many other, the sports is a business. It's entertainment. That's what this is. So that's one. Then you have all kinds of other ways of doing youth soccer, meaning they have competitive clubs, pay-to-play models, non-profits. You have people that are volunteers. You have Latino leagues, Victor. Latino leagues that are interested in one thing. How can I keep, I'm going to use this word, my fiefdom together? I don't want anybody bothering me. I don't have any interest in ever integrating myself into the U.S. soccer structure. Our kids, wherever they come from, we want them to go back to Mexico and play. We want them to go back to El Salvador and play. And I live in my own world. I respect that. There's no reason why they can't. So my point is, the Dynamo may have an idea, but our community, Victor, is so fractured. I've been here over 30 years, and I have no idea how all of us could come together, because there's so many people that have their own interest at hand. I'm not saying it's a bad thing. I just think that's the reality of what we live.
Yeah, and it's going to be complicated because, like you mentioned, there are, if you want to, again, just the reality. There are clubs that are more focused on just the commercial side of things.
Sure.
They don't have the sport in mind, right? So they are going to have to be able to identify that and say, all right, this is somebody we don't want to associate with. That's fine. But I think there's enough here in this town, right, to open the doors of opportunity for the clubs that are interested in growing the sport, for the clubs that are interested in being a part of this, right? For the the coaches that are out there that are Again, maybe not necessarily for the money, but for the love of the development of these players. And that's where they have to empower those communities, right? In different realms of the city, from Channelview to Katy to the Woodlands to Pearland and all around. Again, that's the big dream, right? For us, we want to see this community succeed. And what's happening in Dallas, what's happening in Seattle, what's happening in LA and Philadelphia with those academies, that's not anything that can't happen here. There's a lot of talent here. There's more than enough talent for players to come through the academy, to go to other leagues, on and on and on.
Victor, I'll leave you with one more because I think this is something we're going to revisit. You mentioned Michaela Abam, right?
Yeah.
And I hope I'm not mispronouncing her. I love her, and I always mispronounce her name, so I'm sure she's going to listen to this and get mad at me. But here's my point. How are the Dynamo FC going to solve the reality of, hey, if X club developed a player, he or she has been there for 5
example.
Yes, among others. They developed the player. Is there not a compensation that should come to that team? And I think that's a first step of a lot of people that are doubting the Dynamo FC's intentions. You want to work with all of us? There's a player in our system that's been here for 5 years. We believe her value is X amount of dollars. You want them to be part of your system, Dynamo Dash? Compensate us. So it is going to come down to the almighty dollar, Victor, at the end of the day. If the big clubs that are sending players overseas or to play at Div 1 colleges, if they're able to strike a relationship with the Dynamo FC, it's not going to be out of kindness. It's not going to be out of the benefit for our soccer community. The Dynamo FC are also a business, Victor. They're buying and selling players. They have a payroll. They have a budget. Is it not fair to go back and say, hey, Club X, you really worked great on this player. He went through your system. She went through your system. Here's compensation. That's a tricky one.
Yeah. Memo Rodriguez is really the example there, right? Houstonians, how's that relationship? Mm-hmm. But again, we can go on and on and on. The development too, right? I think that's another one. Luring players to your academy. Is it going to be difficult? It's having Dynamo 2 enough. I mean, because again, when you look at a trajectory of where talent has gone and hasn't made it to the MLS level, certainly if you're a parent of a child, do you want your team? Do you trust the Houston Dynamo with your child, with their development? But again, a lot of good things said. I think maybe I'm a little bit less optimistic just because I've been through a lot of these now where there's a lot of good first steps, but the second, the third, the fourth, the fifth, it doesn't continue. So again, wishing the best for Onstadt, for Mendelssohn, for the Dynamo, and hopefully this thing can come to fruition.
That's on the men's side, the Dynamo FC, the men's professional side, the Dash on the women's side, NWSL. Well, also with some news this week, Victor, the coach that's just been here this season, Sam Lady, is out. Did you see that one coming?
I didn't. It's sort of like the Dynamo last year with Nagamura, right? Just a few months in, or just a couple months in, or more actually. Good. I would say it's a good move because at least you're cutting ties if you know it's not going to work. My biggest concern with this one, and obviously we talked about the loss in the last podcast and where the team was headed. My concern is more, you had already gone to the playoffs, basically by sheer luck, because if you remember, Clarkson was suspended, right? So that brought the need for an interim. They found and hired Juan Carlos Amoros to come in. He got the team to the playoffs for the first time ever. Why they didn't give continuation to that process, to me, is still baffling. I know people mention family, all this thing. To me, if you wanted that guy on your team, you would have found a way, right? And Ted Siegel, we've seen him spend money on other things. To me, that was a huge miss that would have contributed to the long-term success of the Houston Dash. And now here you are again, looking for another coach.
Look, you're spot on. What could have been the difference financially, Victor, between keeping Juan Carlos Amoros and not? and the rapport he built, the energy he had. I think he's a charismatic person, and he brought success last year. That stadium almost full, playoffs for the first time in the team's history. And what could have been? Who could have been?
And it's a lack of,
were they off by $10,000? Was it that simple?
It couldn't have been much, right? Because I mean, it's not like we're talking about the NWSL being, a big money mover in terms of soccer, right? I mean, I know there's been advances, but I think again, and when we talk about the investment in the women's game, I mean, again, if the difference was maybe even $100,000 in salary a year, why not make that move,
sure.
right? When it's such a fragile thing to go from one coach to another. Maybe there were other differences, but I'm just going based on things maybe I've heard that I can sort of report on, right? But again, and maybe this is the thing too, just media coverage in this town. If the Dynamo lack it, the Dash lack it even less. And this is a conversation maybe we should have been having months ago. Going on through the season again, maybe conversation about the tactics. Ebony Salmon was a big talking point this season. I think certainly she couldn't have been happy being maybe on the fringe of making the England squad for the World Cup and basically being erased because of a new coach, of a new system. When she was a player that when Amoros was here, he went in and traded for her.
But do you think that move now, by the way, those of you that don't know, she's no longer with the club. She's been sent to Aston Villa.
Right.
Do you think this the Dash saying, look, we're throwing in the towel, we're done for this season? It appears to me that's the case.
I think I would imagine the player might have asked for a move, and rightly so, because I mean, she wasn't getting much playing time here. I can imagine a player like of her stature is trying to get into the England squad. Look, they just made it to the final of the Women's World Cup. I think they'll probably continue to be a contender, right, for the next coming years. She's obviously still young. I still think, again, a more stable product here in Houston. Maybe you would have kept Rachel Daly. I know these are things that are woulda, coulda, shoulda in the past. But again, when you're looking to the past and what to correct, these are the sort of things that the Dash need to correct. Having stability as a coach, obviously one. Treating the players well, right? Making this a true destination. I know maybe compared to other markets, the facilities, I mean, it's better, but do players feel like they can succeed in this market, right? If that's so, why don't we have a U.S. national team player on this roster? I think those are the things to consider. Sofia Huerta, right, who used to be a player for the Dash, went to her first World Cup with the U.S. When she was here in Houston. I think Christy Mewis as well. Carly Lloyd was on the roster in the past, and they couldn't find success with her. Yeah. I think these are all things to explore. There needs to be more conversation with the Dash, I feel. And I think the lack of it is what sort of just keeps business as usual. I hate it that here we are, another season. I guess it's not over, right? But it looks like it's heading to no playoffs. And what is the outlook of this women's team? Because again, you want it to be a shining light in the community. You want it to be a team that's an example and a unifier. Let's see.
Victor, I've said this publicly, and I believe this, that Shell Energy Stadium could be and should be the cathedral to soccer in our city. And it isn't for a myriad of reasons. And look, it's not to pile on. It's not to be overly critical. I believe part of any change in a positive way is identifying what can you do better. I think there are smart people in the organization that have good intentions, but it's also a process. And it's also recognizing, knowing what's going on around you, Victor. And does Mr. Ted Siegel have the right people in place that have, I'm going to say this, some kind of connection with the community that better understand it? Question mark. I don't have the answer to that. I don't pretend to know everyone within the organization. And I get that there's so many issues involved with competing on the field, with personnel, when it comes to players, with importantly, the financial side of this, partnerships. It's great that they have stadium partners. It's great that they have that aspect of it they're working on. And eventually, we've got to give this time too, Victor. Ted Siegel's going to need time to maybe change and fix many of the issues of the past. And we also have to be patient. Do you think that they're headed at least in the right direction? I'm asking myself this, and I'll tell you, I believe they are, but I think there's still a long way to go.
I thought they were. Like I said, to me, that the fumble there with not keeping Amoros as the coach leaves a lot to be questioned. I think that would be better answered with who they appoint as the head coach. Maybe they bring in a Vlatko Andonovski, right? Somebody who has had success in the league and it turns it around. We'll see. But I think for the moment, I don't, honestly.
There you have it. I like you got to that pretty quickly. So we'll see how that goes. As we wrap up another soccer podcast, Victor, let's talk a little bit about staying with women's soccer. The U of H women playing in another derby locally in the last week. They played against Houston Christian, formerly HBU, picking up a victory there. But we talked about the rivalry, the Bayou Bucket between Rice and U of H. And by the way, in American football, congratulations to Rice for beating the Cougars, right?
Well, you can congratulate. No. Yeah, it's congratulations. It was a beatdown, but there you go. The UH soccer program saving face for the university.
Absolutely. And then in the last match before Big 12 competition and game start, getting upset. Jaime Frias' team losing 0-1 or 1-0 to Texas State.
Yeah.
A well-coached Coach Holloman team, Steve Holloman, the Bobcats found a way to get a victory. And look, for those of you that trust me, it's not because I happen to be on the call. Go and watch that match. It was really a chess match, Victor. And those of us that are into X's and O's and movement, very strategic, two very knowledgeable coaches. And that speaks well of where the women's game is at the college level. And I'll have you comment, Victor, U of H soccer getting ready to play in the Big 12, which is huge. They'll be playing very tough teams, programs like the Longhorns of Texas, the Sooners of Oklahoma, the TCUs of the world, and they start against Texas Tech away at Lubbock.
Yeah, and it's a big moment, I think, because it's the biggest one, I think, right, is opportunity.
Yeah.
You do well in this conference. I mean, this is a game changer now to be able to get into the national title picture at some point if you have the right pieces, right, and if you have the right players. So that's going to be huge for the advancement of the program at UH, obviously, because they're in the Big 12. Well, hopefully, we'll see that with Rice, obviously, with the move to the American Conference, and again, see these schools here in Texas be lifted. I think have the Texas and the Texas A&Ms maybe been allowed to be comfortable. Right, because I think again, why haven't we have a consistent contender for national championships here in the great state of Texas with all talent that there is down here? The more the merrier, and hopefully we can see them get off to a good start.
Absolutely. Victor, the last topic before we wrap up the soccer. I don't know what the right word is. Where do you find this situation? Resignations of the coach, now of the federation president, if I'm not mistaken, and what should have been a celebration has turned now into something different. Yeah,
and it's obviously a sensitive subject, right? Because of what we saw in the celebration. Again, what should have been just a focus on the national team finally winning a Women's World Cup. And where these ladies have come from, right? The advancement of the sport in women's soccer in Spain, to that whole ordeal with the federation president, and there was allegations previously with the coach as well. Coming out throughout the World Cup, right? The players that were already in protest, and now you just had, the entire basically all the women's pool go and protest, and you had some of the obviously important players from the men's team as well add their names to this.
Solidarity.
Yeah. It wasn't obviously the best moment for them, and certainly not the way some of this transpired. Right. The lack of sensitivity, we can say, right, when Rubiales goes on that podium and he still has the audacity to say he's not going to resign and gets applauded. I mean, I think all of this in this day and age, I think we all thought we were sort of past it. Obviously, maybe some of these European countries are still stuck in old ways, but you're glad to see the change. Let's hope now the focus turns back into this women's team and what they have accomplished, and hopefully Spain will be better for it.
Victor, you're right. It is sensitive. Anyone cannot justify bad behavior. Period. Whether it's gender related, whether it's sexist, whether it's discriminatory. Period. And I think there's a couple ways to look at this, Victor. Maybe this is the moment to make a bigger deal out of this, or the biggest deal, or the proper deal of what this is. Regardless of the short-term pain of, look, we should be celebrating, let's keep quiet. That's been used in the past a lot. Hey, we're doing good. Don't worry about that other stuff. It's minor. Something minor in someone's eyes can be something major in someone else's. And there is a cultural shift. And I'm happy about that cultural shift. And I see it every day. That there need to be more opportunities and more respect for women, more opportunities and more respect for anyone that isn't in power, period. And I think that's the hardest part of this now, that how do we navigate this? And also, Victor, you talked about this earlier with investigations. Transparency. Let's have information. Let's have good information, not slanted and or information that's guided by an agenda. And I think you can go too far in either way, to be honest with you. Any extreme, to me, is bad. You see that in U.S. politics today. The extremists are the ones getting the attention, where I believe the majority of us have so much in common that it's simple to sit down and talk and discuss it. But it's those extremes that unfortunately infiltrate the conversation, Victor, and get us to the point where they're almost forcing us to, and I've said this before, if you're not with me, you're against me. And there are certain things that cannot be tolerated, Victor, period. And they should not be tolerated. But how do we, as humans, talk about these things and try to solve them?
I think it's certainly in this case, at least the way I see it, it was more simple, right? It was in terms of what's right and what's wrong. I think maybe if there was, I don't know. I don't want to,
I understand. But I'm going to stop you. It's
maybe
even
there was more sensitivity, right?
But it's even difficult to talk about, Victor, because if you don't say the right thing, someone can unfortunately jump on you. Yeah. Let's talk about it. And look, for Alex Parra, not Victor, I can get the conversation wrong. I can get even the perspective of the lens wrong. But let's talk about it so we can solve it.
Right. I just think, again, to me, it was just kind of common sense, right? Yeah. To see the reaction from people, the way Rubiales reacted to it, the way, the coach reacted to it, to just kind of not care, right? I think that's...
To dismiss it.
That sort of right, to dismiss it. Those are, you can't have that. The lack of acknowledging, I mean, even if there's some form of abuse or at least somebody feels... affected. I think that lack of sensitivity is, what sort of spurs this whole thing on. I mean, I think, it's just being human. It's just acknowledging somebody else. And I don't think in this case, I don't think there was any hidden agenda here. I think there should have been a celebration. I almost feel a bit bad because had England won that World Cup final, because it was a tightly contested game, right? Are we even talking about this change? Do things in Spain just kind of go on as they were? Was this championship win able to spur this on, a protest that had been happening already but didn't have the same type of coverage? You almost wish it wasn't that way again in this day and age. But the important thing is now looks like at least there's been a change, and hopefully we can move past it and continue to have things just be fair. I think that's it, right? The lack of the Spanish Federation to again move on this, and UEFA had to step in. I think that's where the outrage comes from, right? The lack of justice. And that's all people want. Just be fair and be just.
Yeah. Well, Victor, look, we'll close out the show, but I have to get this in. We're talking about bodies under FIFA, one of the most corrupt entities on the planet.
Yeah,
that FIFA and justice, FIFA and what's right, FIFA and transparency, they don't go hand in hand. And U.S. soccer, like the Spanish Soccer Federation, are under that culture, which hasn't changed, which continues to justify their greed, period, in my opinion. And if that's the shining light that's guiding us, I think we need to tear all of that down. If I'm honest with you, Victor, maybe that'll be for another show. I see a lot of people out there saying women need more equality. Women deserve this. You know what? None of us are going to get that under the current structure. So if you really want to make a change, tear it down. Tear down FIFA. Start another U.S. Soccer Federation that can compete against the monopoly that exists now. Don't get me started, Victor. I need to take my little pill.
Yeah, we went into this. It's never going to be perfect, right? But at the very least, I think we can at least hope for human decency, and that's in this case, I don't think we're even getting that, and I think that's fine to fight for. I think it sucks that it has to get to that point, and maybe hopefully we can have some more change and see. Again, this is all
new territory.
FIFA, FIFA, all that. I mean, it's always gonna stay that way. But I think for the public, right? I mean, I think at least let there be some part where it feels like the game is still ours, right?
Yeah. Look, there's no perfect institution. Don't get me wrong. But can we be human? Can we be respectful of each other? That's where it should be headed. I'm still optimistic, Victor, that we can. It is within our means, within our power to make some of these changes. Victor, we got to go. Our producer's telling us we've gone long, but I've enjoyed every moment. Victor, a lot of ground covered today. What are you looking forward to as we prepare for this coming week in the world of soccer?
Yeah, we have a lot of rivalry games, a couple of derbies here. Tata Martino's return to Atlanta, and obviously Messi's visit to in MLS, and obviously they're trying to continue the playoff push. El Tráfico out in LA, so we have that this weekend. The Milan Derby in Serie A, so that'll be one for Pulisic. America Chivas in Mexico.
Is that a Clásico? I didn't know that.
Yeah, wow. I think a lot of good games this weekend to sort of keep an eye on, and again. Just do we have time for it all?
Absolutely. Well, we're living good soccer moment, Victor, and I'm very appreciative of you being with me when we present this Deportes Nation Soccer Podcast. So, ladies and gentlemen, thanks to all of you for following us, for watching us. Please send us your comments via social media. Find us. We want to hear from you. Number one, about naming the podcast officially. And second, questions, comments, we welcome that. I certainly don't pretend to know it all. We need to hear from you. You're a big part of this program. So on behalf of our production crew, on behalf of Victor Araiza, I'm Alex Parra. Thanks to all of you that are following us. And more importantly, thank you for being part of our Deportes Nation family. So we bid you adieu, adios, goodbye. Until next time when we meet here on Deportes Nation.